Well, hello again, and I again hope your weeks or days or whatever time we've been from we started to the last are going well and we're feeling a little more regulated in the changes or whatever things are happening in your life right now. And as we go back into our classrooms, we think about those kids who struggle the most. And I think that sometimes we think we have a lot of them when really there's only that handful. The problem is that handful consumes so much of our time that it feels like an entire classroom full. So we've talked about what we can do as a school, what we can do in our classrooms to encourage self-regulation. And now we got to talk about what do we do with those handful of kids that are really struggling. First of all, if your school does some things to be consistent and you put some things in your classroom to be consistent, those kids are going to do a whole lot better. But if those things are not happening as well as you'd like them to happen, those kids will really struggle. And so we've got to think about, first of all, what's creating that problem, if you will. Individuals who are really dysregulated, usually there's a whole lot more going on. It's environmental circumstances, it's trauma, it's things in my life. As I said, as a classroom teacher, you don't become regulated unless somebody regulates you first. And if you're coming from a place where you don't know where you're going to go on the weekend, or things have happened to you or your family or whatever the case may be, it creates even more havoc on your insides. And so these are kids that live in what we describe as, clinicians describe as fight, flight or freeze rather. So I either have to run away from you, I have to fight back, or I stop in my tracks and don't move. And in many ways, it's to gain control. Human beings don't like to be out of control. And when things happen in your life consistently that create a lack of control, you think irrationally and you do things that are irrational. You think maybe you need to buy 15 cases of water because we're going to have a snowstorm or something like that. And that's because you want to gain back control. And that's what these kids are doing as well. So we have to be very careful that we respond to these children versus reacting to these children. And I just want to repeat that because it's so important. I want to respond to them instead of react to them. And remember, we only have control over our response to behavior. And that's the only thing we have that might send a different message to the child, but it will also regulate us. So I always think about, where am I in this particular circumstance when the kid is running around the classroom, throwing things, tipping over chairs, or maybe even, screaming loudly. First of all, I totally understand the safety thing. We have protocols in place to, what are we going to do with this child if we need outside assistance? Or we should have protocols in place, let's put it that way. And we be very consistent with it. When a child reaches this level, we call whomever, this happens, child is able to calm themselves down, is able to put themselves together, and we do that every single time. But we give them tools on how to do that. We don't keep changing the rules. Well, tomorrow we'll do this, the next day we'll do this. You've got to keep at it. Anybody who puts a behavior plan in place, if you will tell you that the worst thing we do is we put something in place and then 3 or 4 days we change it because it's not working. What we know is that when we respond to behavior consistently, it's likely to escalate before it's going to get better. Because if a child feels they're out of control, they're going to up the ante to get back control. The other thing we have to really think about is the power of relationship. And I say it all the time, is you will not get rigor without relationships. And that's super important. So the power of relationships can be really hard too with these kids because they turn our classrooms on their ear and they make us feel very agitated and frustrated because we feel for the rest of our class, and I totally get that. But we have to take it out of the way we feel, and this is the hard part. We have to think about, how does that child feel? What's going on with them right now? And oftentimes we lose that in the frustration or the anger that we feel about what that child is creating for other children, for the school, for what you really want to get done in your classroom. And I totally validate that. But then we also have to validate for the child that they're in trouble. here. And we have to help them to feel safe, again, to feel validated, to try to understand what's going on inside of them. And because they don't understand what's going on inside of us. And so every time we get into these power struggles with kids, we create more problems. So when I talk about relationships, it's about saying, when do you have time in your day that you can have lunch with this child, that you can talk to this child about whatever they love or whatever, even if it's something you don't like, you can kind of, oh, the video game, like, I'm not a big fan, but I will say, wow, that's a really interesting video game. I've got 5 minutes right now. Why don't you sit and tell me about it? Allow that to happen without earning it. And I think that's another thing. People say, well, why should I give this kid that privilege to have lunch or to go out and play ball with me if their behavior's been terrible? In a case of that top % of your kids that are really dysregulated because of other factors, whether they be cognitive, physical, social, or emotional factors, think of it this way. It's no different than a reading intervention. If a child needs a reading intervention, we never take that reading intervention away simply because you misbehaved. So a child who is completely dysregulated, if the intervention is spending a little time with me, getting to know me, letting me know that I'm safe around you and that you like me and you're interested in me, might help me to get that nervous system in check a little bit so I can calm enough so you can get things into them, like teaching them how to regulate using certain breathing techniques or mindful activities for kids. We know this stuff works, but getting kids willing to do it, especially the top population of individuals, is really tough because it makes them feel vulnerable. So if you've tried these techniques in your classroom, there's wonderful things out there, yoga for kids, things like that. If you've tried these things though, and those are the kids that are rolling around in the back and they won't do it, the reason they're rolling around in the back is because it's making them feel vulnerable. And they don't want to do something that makes them feel vulnerable because that makes them feel more out of control. The only way they can curb that is to build that relationship that allows them to be a little vulnerable in your classroom. And that's a little extra work on our part. It's sometimes a lot of extra work on our part. And if we're working with a child who's explosive and we're working with other adults, we all have to say, this is our goal. And our goal is to get that relationship built with the classroom teacher, paraprofessionals, whoever spends the most time with the child. Because if we continue to send the child out to build a relationship with someone else, sure, they'll dial it down and regulate and behave for them, but really we need them to behave for us. So there's times when I might say to a second person, a counselor or a behavior specialist or triage, whatever we call, I might say, cover me for 10, cover my class. I will take the child and help them, which to me is far more better than always having somebody else help them, because then the child realizes that, hey, this is the person I can be vulnerable and change and do stuff you want me to do, but it's still not us in the classroom. It's a little trickier, it's a lot harder, it's a lot more time consuming. The more we learn about where dysregulation comes from the nervous system, we know that the mind controls the brain, and if we can change the mind, we can dial back and the brain can have a chance to actually think about the decisions that it's telling our body to do. So when I work with a young child, I'll give you a little example. I was working with a little one day. He was at the water fountain and he was really angry. And I said, wow, how's things going today? And he says, I'm really mad. And I said, wow, you look mad. And he said, I'm going to punch this kid. And I said, yes, I can see that. And he goes, how do you know? I said, because your hands are in fists. I said, could you do me just a favor? Could you look at your hands? And he very quickly looked down and he looked at his hands and he said, yep, they're in fists, all right. And then I said, what are your toes doing? And because he was 5 or 6 years old, I was able to kind of get in there and joke around a little bit. And I had a good relationship with the kids, so that gave me the in. That always has to come first. And he said, my toes are curled. And he said, and my knees hurt. And he said, and while you're on the track, my tummy hurts too. And I said, that makes total sense to me. Let's uncurl your toes and uncurl your fingers. And as we did this, I started to see a little opening. I said, you know what, just take a quick walk with me before you get on the punching idea. And we were able to kind of overcome and teach some skills at that moment. But if I had said and reacted to him with, what do you mean you're going to punch somebody? That's dangerous. That's unsafe. Come with me. I would have just put him in the state that he was already in, which was dysregulation. So it's the same thing with the high school kid who's coming at me screaming and yelling and saying, you can't tell me what to do. And the last thing I want to do is say, you, come here, what's your name? Or that's it, go to the office. I got to stop for a second and I got to stop, think, and process. STP, stop, think, and process. Say, you know what? Sometimes the best response is no response at all. Get yourself regulated and then don't take it personally. And then put whatever plan in place or the response that you hope is going to send kind of a neurological message to that other person. In other words, if you want them to calm down, you got to calm down. See you again soon. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss another video. I speak and consult on school behavior, and I love to help districts solve some of these problems. See you next time.